All right, welcome back to Beyond the Cards, your podcast where all of us payment nerds talk about all things payments related and talk about the stories you want to hear most. How's it going, everybody?
Hi.
Hello,
No,
everyone.
it is going good. It's going good.
Well, nice. I thought I'd start out the beginning of the show with a quick shout out for any of those listeners who are Treasury curious or experienced Treasury professionals. We have actually launched a Treasury Toolkit, which is a fun assortment of small 45-second to 1 minute video explainers on Treasury concepts. You can find that on our Redbirch YouTube channel under the link Treasury Toolkit, and we will have that linked below. Look at us, we're regular YouTubers, podcasters, putting in
Of this.
Putting it out.
Only took us almost an entire year, but we're getting there. We're sounding more professional every day. All right, well, should we crack on with some stories?
I believe so.
All right, well, I know we were just recently talking about Weiro, but we have another story about Weiro, this time coming to us from TPA International, which is really asking, is Weiro going to be the new PayPal? But I think the thing that I thought was a little interesting here, beyond just some of the good context about what Weiro actually is, we finally have a rough timeline. So, it's looking like, in 2025, their aim is to actually have Weiro introduced into online shopping instead of just into like the peer-to-peer space, which with most of these kind of payment features, they very much live in the peer-to-peer or account-to-account space. So 2025, we're going to be going to online retailers. And then 2026, hopefully going into actual in-person brick and mortar payments as well. So that's interesting for you guys.
I'm curious to see what is going to come because they're trying to be the new payment platform. And currently they're like they're implementing the Zales and Cash App space. So they're wanting to peek in to compete with the US providers. So I'm wanting to see in the future how that blossoms, how that unravels.
Cab Shira, are you using it? Have you Weiro'd anybody?
Yeah, I think I can go first. I've already used it as a peer-to-peer tool because basically it replaced in France the app that used to be called Paylib. So somehow it was already, the service was already there, at least the service that is already live. And I've used it and it works pretty well. You just need to dial, to put a number, and I think even if the person is not using Weiro, you can still transfer the money, and then the person that receives the money needs to do something just to receive the money into the bank account, probably actually adding the bank account. So yeah, it works pretty well. And I would add that I think, we already discussed about it last time, but I think Weiro is really a huge opportunity, and at the same time, it's just for now, until they prove otherwise, there are another payment method that needs, as Jasmine was saying, needs to compete with the big players that have been there for a while, like PayPal, like the article is saying. So can Weiro really compete with PayPal? And I was actually thinking, that the most important thing for a payment method is not only the functionalities, is the audience, is the users. If there is no user, there is no payment method. So I was thinking that there are different challenges depending on the country and the type of customer they are addressing. Thinking especially where PayPal is really strong in Europe, like Germany and Italy, which actually both countries could be very interesting for Weiro, but there is PayPal. And then on the other side, countries where card is really important, like France or Spain, they have first they need to compete with cards, and even Spain or other areas, they have their local solutions like Bizum, and actually even if I continue with Spain or Italy, they are even creating a Weiro alternative in the south of Europe. So just sharing thoughts, but I think the potential is huge. Curious to see if they will really compete with PayPal, and probably the moment they can start to compete with them is when they can really bring new use cases and compete rather with cards, thinking, for example, about merchant-initiated transactions, recurring payments, even super app sort of solution that we'll discuss later. Many opportunities, but a lot of challenges as well.
Yeah, a lot of challenges, especially because also to try to compete against PayPal, also you will need strong incentives, not only from consumers, but for also merchants. So, for example, when you see, for instance, the pricing also that PayPal applies, this can be something that they can compete. You see what I mean? But although the adoption of the consumer is, in a way, as we are already used to using our Paylib, Sans Contact, and so on apps, this is not something that could be a huge thing to implement it. But let's see. Also, what I'm thinking about is that I never used it. But I don't know whether. I mean, is it a solution that is robust? Is it as robust as PayPal? Does it face actually some technical issues, for instance? Is it working 100% time also? We have to think about it. And looking at the article mentions it, that there are some also contexts where you can't use it. Also, for example, you have to be careful about not using it if you are connected to a public Wi-Fi and so on. So let's think also about the risk that you can take.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to another one of our stories. But I think that's always like, with these peer-to-peer transfer services, right? They're almost always real time, and Weiro is exclusively real time, which means, you type in someone's phone number incorrectly and you've potentially sent money to the wrong person. And also the speed at which these things are moving. You talked about how robust it is. That also would then apply to like how robust is their shutting down fraudsters or potential fraud on these types of peer-to-peer payment systems that really then evolve into more merchant-facing payments. And I think from like a competition standpoint, it's kind of getting, I almost feel like, especially within some of these payment methods, we're almost kind of into like the streaming wars, right? Where it's like there's so many options of these new payment methods, right? At some point, as they proliferate, it often comes down to who has the most money to promote themselves, to, as you mentioned, like strike incentives to be offered as payment methods. Because, if you're a merchant, you can't support 25 different peer-to-peer or, instant transfer payment methods, right? So there either has to be some sort of ease of integration or, potential integrator who, maybe it's an acquirer who says, well, I can add all of these payment methods in the same widget for you. But that's really going to, I think what ultimately really drives adoption is, sure, it exists, but can I use it to pay something, right? And the other thing that I'm worried about, and I wonder if this is kind of a situation in Europe, is, at least in the US, there's a lot of people who use these peer-to-peer apps inappropriately, not just from a fraud perspective, but people are already making payments to businesses using things like Zelle and Cash App, which don't have robust tax reporting, which basically means people are using it to get, quote unquote, paid under the table, and not paying, business income tax or business taxes on these payments, which has led to, vast confusion around how these apps are going to issue tax forms. And, if you send money to people a lot on Weiro, right? And let's say you send 5,000 euros in the course of a year, are you going to like is there a potential money laundering issue, or how do you make sure that you're not a business using it inappropriately? So I think there'll always be some challenges whenever you either evolve from a P2P payment method to a business payment method. And if you keep both functionalities at the same time, right, it just becomes really confusing about whether you're making a payment to a business or a payment to, a friend, or, I don't know, maybe you bought like a couch off somebody, right? Like keeping that line between business payments and true P2P payments, I think is a challenge these payment methods will always have. And I don't know if there's a good solution that exists for keeping that in line other than these payment methods having individuals and robust frameworks to analyze and interrogate, is this person laundering money, or is this person getting money because they're a business and they're not actually reporting any of this income? Difficult to say.
Very, very difficult. I think that's when they need to get something in place to implement or distinguish, especially when you're doing a one-time or first-time transfer or sending over, to identify what this is. Do you know this person? Is it a business? Like, I believe some people do it today.
Yeah, 100.
Yeah,
totally. There's so many people that are like, yeah, don't pay me with a card. Can you just pay me on Cash App? And it's like, or like, pay me on Zelle. And I'm like, no, I can't pay you on Zelle because I'm still I'm still not allowed to use the Zelle after I had my banking details compromised. But as somebody who has had their banking details compromised, I can tell you that the amount of attempted Zelle transactions that happened in such a short period of time, it's mildly terrifying. So, obviously, if you're utilizing these services, exercise extreme caution. Don't use public Wi-Fi. Make sure that you know the person you're transferring money to, because scammers are getting good, and it doesn't matter where you are around the world. Scammers all kind of learn from the same dark web playbook.
And having a new payment method like that is an opportunity for them also to attempt and to try new fraud patterns and so on. So be careful, of course.
Totally. So Capital One cardholders may have their cards reissued under the Discover label. So Dacia Milden gives us this article from CNET, who's really talking about this whole acquisition by Capital One. I think the deal is not entirely finalized, but we're going into a regulatory environment here in the US that's not particularly keen on blocking these types of mergers and acquisitions. So I don't particularly see anything standing in its way. But as we had kind of suspected and likely has to happen, right? Capital One customers will likely start to have cards reissued that were Visa or MasterCard branded cards under the Discover brand name, which means, of course, a whole bunch of cards will be reissued. You'll get new card numbers, etc. And I think, obviously, depending on how Capital One intends to roll out this reissuing, I'd imagine it's probably something like all new customers will likely get issued a Discover card as default. And if your current credit card or debit card is expiring, they're probably going to just replace it with a Discover card.
I'm going to be curious to see, because, a lot of those are probably some type of rewards-based cards, how they make that transition equivalent, or what happens with those card holders if they have, probably some of them signed up for specific cards because of the program. And so will they just replicate that program back over to Discover, or I'm sure there's a lot of components there that have to be worked out to try to keep keep your customers happy, but also make money?
Yeah, I think this is going to be something really interesting, right? From an interchange perspective, Discover has these multi-tiered rewards interchange, right? Rewards, premium, premium plus. And that's very similar to like MasterCard's program where it's like, you have your Merit 1, 3, enhanced, high value, world elite. And those two systems are kind of what I would say there's more tiers within those systems than I would say on the Visa kind of side of things. You kind of have less of those tiers on Visa. So what I think will be really interesting to watch is, in our positions, right, we're sitting here consuming and analyzing interchange categories and the amount of volume flowing over them to see how this transition changes the weighting of what we see on Discover interchange, right? Do we see more on the lower end tier of their interchange programs, or do we see just a heavyweight right to the premium pluses and premium plus interchange, which is, if I'm not mistaken, is either the same price or slightly higher than Visa MasterCard. So could be really interesting to watch how those interchange categories evolve and whether this means we're standing at the precipice of Discover introducing a myriad of new interchange programs to account for kind of what you just mentioned, Chelsea, which is, they're going to have to collect fees to support the level of rewards customers are used to getting.
Guys, something that I wanted to maybe ask you guys in the US, and something I was trying to think about the potential synergies that they could be between both Capital One as an issuer and Discover as a network. And first thing I thought was Amex, American Express. Could this be the new or the sort of American Express piece, considering the success and the profitability that Amex is been showing for many years? Do you think that Discover being a relatively not very used network, but at the same time with a huge reach worldwide, especially in Western Europe and North America, do you think that Capital One now have access somehow to all those merchants accepting Discover, and considering that they could issue a lot of new cards with very interesting reward programs and really competing against Amex at the same level? Is that a possibility, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it really is kind of uncharted territory to some extent. Like, yes, Amex, its own issuer, own acquirer, who kind of then like led into the other way. We haven't had in a long time a major global network now being owned by an issuer, right? Visa, MasterCard not owned by issuers, separate networks. I mean, this article does kind of eke out that in terms of global reach, yes, Discover and like the Diners Club networks are pretty expansive. But they're not as expansive as Visa and MasterCard. So, depending on how Capital One chooses to really, I don't know, maybe even penetrate different regions of the world where maybe they've been less competitive or see an opportunity, we could probably, potentially see a lot more Discover cards popping up in those regions. Like maybe in Latin America, instead of seeing so much MasterCard or so much Visa, we start to see, oh, hey, this country is now like entirely dominated by Discover. Because like, correct me if I'm wrong, and I feel like, especially here in the US, doesn't Discover also act as the go-to network for routing China Union Pay and Japanese Card Bureau, JCB, CUP?
Yeah, I think you're right.
So it could be really interesting whether they reverse that pathway and try to take over more of Asia. I don't know. One thing is for sure is a whole bunch of reissuing is usually, and if it's a whole bunch of reissuing at one time, as a merchant, you definitely probably need to be cautious of things like recurring payments, switching over. I'd be really interested to see how like network tokenization flows into this. Like if you had a Visa network token for your card, it expires and then becomes a Discover card. Do you have to then provision a new network token, or does that network token transfer over? I don't know.
That's a good question. And also to another question I had, because you're reissuing out these cards, you're replacing their current Visa and MasterCard cards over to Discover, which I believe we talked about this sometime last year when we first start hearing about this acquisition. But with the increase in Discover cards and the volume that these merchants are going to be seeing, you're going to see different changes with debit, because Capital One issues their MasterCards, their debit cards and MasterCards. So how's that going to look for Discover? Because you really don't see Discover and debit. So you're going to see an increase in that. It's like, how is that going to, stream down? How is, after a certain threshold, they're like Amex, you go to Discover Direct, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Hard
like,
to say how if they'll switch back to that system.
Exactly. So how would you switch back? Because you can't have 1,000 merchants now because they've reached that threshold strictly on Discover Direct, right? So it's like, where would you have that?
That's a super interesting point. I feel like they wouldn't, because those direct relationships are just so hard to manage. But I don't know, maybe they might do something with incentives or have a little bit more financial power to do that. I do always enjoy coming across a Discover debit transaction. I'm like, ooh, so rare. What are you? Like, who has this?
Right. You forget Discover hides the capability to do debit because you don't see it.
Yeah, totally.
So it's like, what are those new fees going to look like with Discover? Because now you're going to see more changes when it comes to these releases each year once that starts happening.
Yeah, that's the part, selfishly, I'm just hoping doesn't happen, because I don't want to have to deal with learning a whole bunch of new interchange programs.
You kind of look past Discover because it's rarely there. You rarely see the volume.
Well, and it's just honestly a fraction of the interchange programs that, Visa and MasterCard have. And then will we get into more situations where we have competing categorization where, Discover and Visa support advantageous rates under one merchant classification, but MasterCard doesn't? It could be good in terms of forcing some competition in that regard. But I think the thing that I generally notice is that no one is really racing to lower rates. If anything, it's kind of who's going to be the first person to raise rates, and then everyone else follows suit. And it's well, if they're raising rates, I'll raise my rates too. I never really see competition necessarily go in the backwards direction. It happens. It's just rare.
That's what I'm afraid about, especially those kind of fluctuations and changes on the interchange rates. And at the end, the merchant who is the one who loses everything. You see what I mean? So
oh, yeah.
It is
totally.
an everlasting thing happening. So,
well, let's transition and quickly talk about this story from payments.com of the build, buy, or partner for CFOs writing their own transformation playbook. And I thought this was really interesting to me because I feel like in a lot of the work that we do, we kind of run into two classifications: Treasury individuals and CFOs. We have one class where payments is really part of their core operations. And then we often run into classes of businesses where the CFO is almost entirely detached from payment. They'll be oh, I don't touch payments. That's somebody else, or that's a collection of individuals. It's my marketing, IT people. And we've definitely seen payments as its own function come into the C-suite and have, your chief payment officers. But this article really kind of struck me because it really is, and especially in the work we do, we run into these challenges where payments doesn't have a home, but Treasury is trying to assert a stronger control over the process because payments ultimately is a Treasury function, right? It's a cash flow, it's a revenue grower. It also has cost implications. It really tends to land itself more into the Treasury aspect. And I think really this article speaks to the challenges that CFOs are facing, which is you kind of have to start to become a new digital expert.
Yeah, it's very interesting because in a daily basis, this is exactly what we see. When we talk to the merchants, of course, we convince and we try to convince the CFOs so that they have an idea. And most of the time, of course, they're not by themselves. They have their IT team also, their marketing team, which is involved in those engagements, in those projects. Thing is that it also and we can see also the changes. I mean, who is the responsible of the decision at the end? For example, when transformation shall occur also for the benefits of the organization, for the benefits of the merchant, who is responsible? Of course, we can say the CFO, but most of the time, sometimes what we see also is that the IT is driving a little bit also the different changes. They have already their roadmap. We need also to convince them that this transformation is beneficial to them. And so it's very interesting because it enables to see that even the role of the CFO has changed, as he has to be aware of those innovations, also the technology, and must be at the end very close to everything that happens when it comes to payments. Every department when it comes to payments.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would add to that. It's super important for the CFO to really be involved in these conversations because, traditionally, I feel like the mindset is, especially in the Treasury space, it's cash in, cash out, right? Like, when am I getting my cash and when do I have to pay my cash out? And I think something I often joke about, right? Is I'll run into a CFO and I'll ask them about payments and they'll be like, oh, well, I don't take any electronic payments, or I don't take any card-based payments. I'm all ACH, check, and wire. And, they want to have this great conversation about how well they've optimized checks or how well they've optimized an ACH process. And in the back of my head, I'm like, you can work towards optimizing obsolescence as best as you can. But at the end of the day, you are investing time and money and resources into senescing technology. It's dying. And they're so resistant to this. And this is where I think in our space, we run into this a lot, which is this build, buy, or partner, where sometimes it's built and it was built with the concept of not thinking about these kind of different forms of electronic payments. And you run into these really rigid structures where now you can't get the automation that you want without breaking the whole system or taking the system apart to build it back together again. Or sometimes you get the buy solution, which usually is not the most inexpensive, but you don't usually know what actual features from the buy you're using. And because the CFO is often removed from those decision-making situations, or hasn't had an interest in the value of payment you find all of these kind of crazy situations out there where you either can't fix something or fixing something becomes impractical because it's so expensive. And I really think that this article, I enjoyed it because it's really calling attention to those out there who feel like they don't need to be participating in payments because it's someone else's responsibility. Like, no, your role is really evolving. And if you don't evolve, you're going to be left behind. And these types of operational efficiencies in transformations really extract a lot of value from payments. And you're just going to get beat by the companies who can do that better than you can.
And also, that's what we do to make the CFO understand of how much valuable a transformation can be, is to turn it into a return on investment. We shall think about these KPI. So each time of course, it costs a lot of money. You will have to cash out also a lot of money, but at the end, you will earn also, in a certain way. See what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean the times are changing, right? We were just talking about Weiro and instant payments, right? So now you've got to be able to like instantly be able to handle, reconcile, ingest. Also on the disbursement side, can you pay people instantly? A lot of things are changing. And I mean, I think the thing I always caution as well is like, you can read in earnings calls or listen in or read the transcripts. Like, the companies out there that want to play in these spaces are hungry. And if you are going to stay outside of the space and just ostrich the whole situation, you are in the worst position, because at that point you are going to be forced to do something and you're not going to be able to. And I like this article, moving from no because to yes and, you're not going to be able to use the no because anymore, and you are going to be forced to probably buy something or partner with somebody who is going to, yes, make your life really easily through maybe a lot of automation, a lot of easy dev changes. But hey, those companies need to make money, and they're able to offer you those elegant solutions because they can pay developers a lot of money, and you can't pay developers a lot of money without charging a lot of money. This is my soapbox moment of the episode. But there might be another one. Who knows? Well, we were talking about Weiro and potential challenges that they might find. So let's talk about our good old American Cash App. So Cash App parent, which is Block, aka Square, was fined $175 million by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for having very, very weak anti-fraud protections within its platform. And this comes to us from Quark, some good reporting from Roccio Fabro. And I mean, I think it's a thing that we all knew was happening. It just wasn't making as big of headlines, which is the easier you make to send money, the easier it'll be for fraudsters to take advantage of people.
Yes, and when it comes to how they handle the fraud issues, if you report a dispute, it's very, very difficult. So I'm glad that, for one, the CFDP is holding them accountable within this settlement, to where that if there is a dispute, you have to have a person instead of a overreach AI bot. So it's like they're putting more enforcers, because according to Block, we weren't, really responsible for this. They were disregarding everything when it came to being responsible.
Well, and Block, as we know, right, has an acquiring arm, Square. So you think that they would be able to have these types of protections, or at least piggyback off of what's, should be being done on that side. And that's what's like alarming to me, right? Is when you have these companies that have two different arms attached to them. If one has woefully bad fraud protections, does that also mean the other one has woefully bad fraud protections as well? And I think the other thing that I it is still very clear is there is, especially in these instant payment peer-to-peer transfer systems, there's still so much finger pointing, which is, it's not my fault. Call your bank. It's your bank. You call your bank and the bank's like, we don't even know what to do here. You have to go back to Cash App, name, peer-to-peer transfer service. They're the ones who have to compensate you for this, not us. And that just makes it really difficult for consumers to figure out what they're supposed to be doing. So I feel like part of this CFPB fine is also kind of a slap on the wrists of being like, well, you need to work with your banking partners that you're actually transferring this money across to have better protections in place. So I feel like, it's above the just relief, but also, hey, you're operating in the classic kind of a tech mantra, which is move fast, break thing. But, when you're talking about what gets broken, it's people's bank accounts. It's actual human beings.
Can't really also think there's I think there's also a missed education component, right? Where consumers just are not fully aware of the speed of things and the transfers, and the fact that in some cases their recourse is somewhat limited. It kind of goes to that old theory of when people are using, quote, their credit card, right? They at least have some control over what happens if they feel like they've had a fraudulent, transaction or occurrence.
Yeah, and not to drive Apple through the mud here, but this was also like recently brought up between the Apple and Goldman Sachs partnership when it came to like fraud disputes. Basically, people would contact Apple and be like, I have a dispute, and Apple would be like, we don't handle that. Send it to transfer people to Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs would be like, well, this is not our responsibility. You have to call Apple. And there was a whole, kind of paper trail of the disputes were being sent but not responded to in a period, like a correct period of time. So it really does, I think, speak to the need for smart and well-constructed rules and compliance frameworks, which just like certainly do not exist today. And okay, maybe secondary soapbox moment here. Like, there may not be for a period of time the CFPB to actually go out and protect. Right? The agency's entire responsibility is to protect American companies not investing in appropriate compliance. And so, who's to say over the next few years that these types of lending apps and peer-to-peer networks, will just advance even further, knowing, hey, even if we are not acting in the best way or our controls are lacking, it's not anything anyone can do to us anyway. Oh, my soapbox again. Sorry. Okay, I cut that soapbox short. So should we talk about surcharging? Because I know we also love that topic too. I feel like for as long as I've been in my career in payments, Australia has always been kind of this country of, this is where surcharges are, and they're kind of the blueprint of surcharging. But I think why this caught my eye is it really goes to show how aggressive the networks are starting to get in their vocalizations of they do not like surcharging or anyone doing surcharging. And they will use whatever means necessary to lobby governments or lobby for legislation to end surcharging. But I think what's really interesting in this kind of view of the Australian landscape of where surcharging has been around for a lot longer, but also Australia's cost of payments is significantly lower than, say, the US or Canada. It's still clearly a problem where merchants, given the opportunity to have lesser regulatory compliance on the amount of surcharging that they can pass, will ultimately pass more surcharges or higher surcharges than they're supposed to.
I think, as a European, and living in France where surcharging is completely forbidden for absolutely everything. I think it's funny because I think surcharging is the only, and if there is one single right that every merchant should have, is surcharging. It's like, I'm somehow suffering from this global monopolistic economy of payment networks, banks, and so on. And I'm a tiny little merchant, even if I'm big, and I'm still tiny compared to those players. The only thing I can do is to surcharge a little bit some payment methods that are more expensive to me. So honestly, I think, as you said, Dan, I think it's crazy how those networks can do lobbying in each and different situation, every region, to the point that they can find reasons, arguments to justify that surcharging is not fair enough, whatever they like. And as in this article in Australia, why the reality is that actually, if Mastercard is complaining, to me, it means that it worked, So I would take, I think they did a good job there. And that's why Mastercard is complaining. So yeah, crazy.
Yeah, it's very funny to see them saying that they want to improve transparency and encourage this fair pricing, and at the same time rising also the interchange fees and their scheme fees. So it's it's funny. It's a little bit awkward. You see what I mean? But yeah, what shall the merchant do? To try to cover its costs. To also raise its prices. No. So I completely agree. One of the rights that shall be maintained for any merchant is the ability to surcharge, because at first sight it was meant just to cover the expensive costs of payment of payments. So don't know. Maybe if Mastercard was decreasing and for their pricing, maybe it would avoid surcharging. I don't know.
Well, I think this article, I think, also kind of pulls in a couple of like the large national players in Australia, your Westpacs, your RBAs. And kind of what you see them saying is, hey, our prices actually are low. It's not us that are the problem. And they do point a finger. They point a finger squarely at what I'll just call payment facilitators, with basically saying, hey, we have transparent interchange cost plus pricing, and it's the rate. It's not our fault small businesses are choosing these payfacs, which have blended rate models that are significantly higher than the actual published rates, because they're lumping in other business services that they're recouping through the cost of processing transactions. So you kind of also have this finger pointing at being like, and they outright say in this article they should be banned. Small businesses shouldn't be allowed to use those companies because you're basically, the leopards eating the faces, right? Which is, you complain about how expensive everything is, but then you don't want to use our services. You go to these other companies, which sure make it easier for you to start accepting payments, but you're going to pay a 1.52% premium to do that. And so now you want to surcharge because you want that solution. Well, if you want that solution, you shouldn't be able to surcharge because it was your choice to take the high road. So very interesting kind of finger pointing / joining forces on, banning surcharges, and almost a nationalistic view of, hey, come back to us big Aussie players because we are cheaper than these other, probably, external to our country, that are increasing the cost of payment. I think the other thing that I kind of teased out of this article was like, I feel like in the US, compliance for surcharging is so extensive in terms of only to the cost of payment, transferring the surcharge as a separate amount, how it's shown on receipts. It doesn't seem like Australia has adopted a ton of those practices, which would make it more transparent. Interesting. Surcharging is such an odd animal, especially since it really only exists in Canada, US, and Australia. Because, like, as you guys mentioned, it's banned in Europe, it's banned in the UK, as it should be, because your costs are already so low.
With the little and big exception of commercial cards, which is pretty huge. And this is also banned in France. So we have quite a few clients that are not very happy about it. And for sure trying to find solutions. But yeah.
Also just gets into, like, can you bin filter for those specific cards and not? It's like one of those weird things where it's like, well, we'll do these ones, but just make sure you don't do anybody else, because if you do, we'll come after you. And it's like, well, does a merchant really have that ability to, down at the bin level, slice out only the cards that they're able to surcharge? It's almost like one of those things where it's like, oh, we made it possible, but it's so impractical for you to get there that it's basically a no. All right, well, should we talk about Elon Musk?
Do we have to?
Here. So we wanted to talk about super apps, and why we wanted to talk about super apps was because we had seen some coverage that Twitter, now called X, I will always call it Twitter, has essentially filed for payment licenses to be able to process payments. Now, we knew that they were applying for money transmitter licenses in a number of states, but now we're seeing them basically decide to be a payments company. And for whatever reason, I have no idea, other than the fact that it is known that Elon Musk has had a penchant and want, ever since his brief time at PayPal, to have some sort of all-encompassing everything super app. And I feel like he's going to try to make Twitter that super app. So maybe we should start off with just like what we think is a definition of a super app. And I think of a super app as essentially a standalone app within your app library where you could basically do everything from pay your rent, pay your dentist, buy groceries, buy things online, sign up for subscriptions, and you do so all under one essential credential, which is part of that super app. So all of the merchants you would interact with or services that you would interact with are all integrated into that app. So you're only making payments through that app. Obviously, the global standard of a super app is Tencent's WeChat, and everyone is essentially chasing that WeChat model. Do you guys agree with my definition of super app?
I do.
Yeah.
Good.
So it's basically somehow aggregating any sort of services within, as you said, one set of credentials, and even you don't need to go anywhere else, right? You're on the same environment, or you remain in the same environment, and you basically buy whatever you like.
So I guess the good question is, like, there are and exist social networking platforms or sites that could be very close to being super app potential, but why don't we have super apps in the Western world? Like, there's no super apps in the US. To the best of my knowledge, there's no super app in Europe.
There's no
Why? Good. Again, my assertion correct. Like, why don't we have those? And I think there's actually a very good number of reasons why we don't have super apps in kind of the Western world. And how dare you interrupt me? No, I'm just joking. I mean, I think the biggest kind of block to super apps in the Western world is really kind of the regulatory framework not being conducive to concentrating that much power to one player. Go ahead, Trevor.
No, I was saying that you were wondering why we had not in the Western, no matter whether it's America or in Europe, those kind of super app. would we can think about the regulatory constraints, especially in Europe, with the GDPR and so on, and the difficulty to make to how can I say that, but to kind of make build some cross services. You see what I mean, between different services, for example, the payments, messaging, shopping, and so on. So this can be one of the things that can prevent Europe to be ready for super apps. And also, above all, the strong influence of the card networks that we know, Visa, MasterCard, the banks. So, of course, it limits also the number of alternative for super apps, and who would be there for the super apps. How would it be managed? By who? Because they would want also to have their portion of the cake in a way. So it will be, it's very, and also because it's Elon Musk, and I'm sorry for that, because we are on YouTube, thank God, and not on X, so going to be banned. But also for trust, not yet, but also for trust issues. Of course, European people at least do not trust at all Elon Musk and so on. So, is it something that can be planned? That Europe is ready for? I'm not sure about that. If we talk about if we give the definition of the super app that you provided before, of course, I'm not sure that Europe will be ready. In the US, please feel free to say yes, to tell us. Sorry.
But what I'm curious is that Visa is the only one, looks like, in line to support the X wallet, as it seems like they're wanting to call it. I wonder, like, did MasterCard, the Visa outbid them? Did anyone else try to, be that liaison space between Twitter X and the payments world? Like, is Visa a good fit for them?
I was just going to assume it was like a Silicon Valley connection, Visa being ordered in San Francisco. Yeah, I mean, I think you bring data privacy is definitely something that we consider, especially around payments, very, very seriously. And by having a social media site as a potential super app, I think brings up a lot of privacy concerns, because, whoever is sitting at the helm of that, right, they will see every single payment that you make. And there is a lot of value in being able to package and resell that information to other people. And I think that level of data privacy and possibly even like antitrust or peer-to-peer lending issues really just makes it way more difficult to have a super app. So while the Twitter wallet, because I will call it that, is, potentially something that could be evolving, I just do not see that social media platform as, if there was to be a super app to break through, I don't think it would be that woman.
I would also think that, for example, when we think about Elon Musk, we also have in mind the cryptocurrencies. So, for example, in markets like, where cryptocurrencies, crypto is involved, it could, you see what I mean? If we had a kind of super app specialized on cryptocurrency or stuff like that, why not?
I didn't even think of that. You're so smart. He is super into cryptocurrency. I didn't even think of the blending also of fiat and crypto into a super app. That's been more startling, because then to some extent now you have basically shadow payments being made everywhere. Like, this is the challenge with crypto, is like, you really don't know what's happening or where that money came from, and is it going to operate as some sort of exchange platform. I don't know. So if we think about super apps, I'm kind of curious, who do you think could pull off a super app in the West if one was possible? Jasmine, who do you think could pull off a super app? I'm interested.
Ooh, that's a good one. Like out of all the social media,
Not even just social media, any company who could launch a super app that would be successful. Who do you think that player could be?
I would think Apple at the end of the day.
Yeah, I would say Apple's here.
I would definitely say Apple.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will change. So I was thinking, so one close to the, I mean, within the payment environment would be Klarna, as they are very involved in selling, marketing, and so on, partnerships. I think, they could be closer. And another option that you didn't mention, just to give other options to the audience, would be Amazon.
That's a good one.
That is a good one.
I think
I think
Amazon,
Walmart too will be up there.
yeah, Walmart too, but I think Amazon, if anybody could pull it off, it would be Amazon.
They already branching off into supercars. So
I mean, if you think about it, like you already have Amazon Pay, right? They're already just this massive, quote unquote, trusted merchant, right? So they're already operating at, massive scale so they can handle the traffic. I just think my other one that I could see, and I'm kind of grossed out for myself for even saying this, but the other one on top of Amazon that I think could branch into super app territory, Facebook.
well, yeah, I can see
Absolutely.
Facebook doing that too.
Yeah, I think Amazon would just have a better chance right now. Right in there.
Because they kind of do as the payment facilitator too. The riggers use them as the payment orchestrator, as their
Maybe a little bit over like Apple, actually, because when you think of Apple, you think of, there's such a divide right now with people in their Apple or not device. And
Wow,
drive them and
drive me for being an Android user. I love my Android phone. But yeah, that's why I thought I don't see Apple could be possible, Google could be possible, but I just think it would be Amazon. Sorry, Musk. I don't think you're going to be the guy to do it, because I just think that, especially amongst the other thing that you have to think about, I think, when you think about super apps, right, is it has to be a reputable brand and it has to be a trusted brand. And I think, unfortunately, even if there was to be some sort of connectivity scale met through with the Twitter platform as a potential super app, I think the reputation of that company is going downhill, at least as far as I hopped over to Blue Sky, and I love it, and I'm never going back. So I think in your other consideration of super apps is yes, the connectivity is important, and the data, part of that whole data privacy aspect is your brand has to be reputable on top of it. And as much as people don't like Amazon for, other social issues, I think people generally trust them with things.
right. And then too, how would you market that? How would you want to market that? How would you switch that over when you're already, your reputation is going down? How would you get people to come over to use that network? How are you going to monetize that? Which, the article questions that. How are you going to do that?
I mean, there's already the Alexa, smart home integration. So could you imagine just being sorry for any listeners, hey, Alexa, pay my water bill.
Everyone's Alexas are going off right now.
Yeah, everyone's water bill just got paid. You could really think of okay, from a super app perspective, now you have kind of that smart home integration. That's why I'm just because if anyone did it, it would be Amazon.
I would say even the business model is there, because they manage all the marketplace with all the sellers, so they know how to be the intermediary. As you said, the this trusted third party in the middle and just orchestrating, as you guys were saying, different services, payments, commissions here and there. They are capable of keeping this robust solution as they do is a massive and worldwide set of operations. So yeah, I think it would make sense.
Jeff Bezos, call us. We're happy to help consult you on how to create a super app. If you need us all to be heads of the department, certainly, reach out. Also curious to hear listeners' opinion on who they believe could be a good super app. Fun time. Well, guys, I think we did it.
We did.
We did. Well, we look forward to speaking on a whole bunch of news stories and some fun topics coming in the future. And please remember to check out our Treasury Toolkit linked in the description below. Bye.
Bye, everyone.